first general session of the annual convention of the Indiana Council for the Social Studies. I hope those of you who have been here for the meetings this afternoon have found them to be rewarding, and I'm sure that the ones which will come will bring you equal satisfaction because of the efforts of our President-elect Lucille Turner and our Vice President Floyd Fithian. We're doubly honored this afternoon with the presence of our distinguished speaker and the lady who will introduce him. Both have brought distinction to Indiana, to their professions, and to themselves. If anyone in the Indiana Council does not require an introduction, it is Adeline Bringle. In the past, she has given us capable leadership as President of the Indiana Council and of the National Council as well, holding responsible positions in other professional organizations and education. Yet with all her achievements which have come, and will certainly continue to come, the most highly regarded aspect of her life by those who know her is her friendship. With this, I give you Ms. Adeline Bringle.
Thank you. It's late, so I'll not make this introduction as lengthy as I had planned. I do want to say for all of us, thank you, Senator Bayh, for arranging the conferences for our high school students that you do in recent years. It's been a real pleasure to have this opportunity and privilege to meet these people from government that you bring with you. Senator Bayh will speak to us today on his plans for trying to get the 26th Amendment, what he hopes to be the 26th Amendment passed that will reform the Electoral College. Senator Bayh.
Thank you very much, Adeline Bringle, President Sheets, members of the Indiana Council of Social Studies, and guests. I'm glad to have the chance to share some thoughts with you here this afternoon. I apologize for the tardy arrival. I found myself the victim of an airplane that didn't want to function quite like it should, and if it's going to malfunction, I'd rather do it on the ground rather than in the air. I can't help but think of the story they tell about this airliner that took off a couple of years ago from Washington National Airport headed toward Atlanta, Georgia. Got up about 10,000 feet and leveled off, and the loudspeaker system came on, and everyone expected the stewardess to tell them about the oxygen and the escape hatch, et cetera, et cetera. This was not the case. It was a male voice, something like this. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to National Airlines Flight 305, headed from Washington National Airport to Atlanta, Georgia. Sit back and relax. You are participating in the world's first non-piloted automatic air flight. Have no fear. Nothing can go wrong, can go wrong, can go wrong, can go wrong, can go wrong. Well, at least we got our problem settled, and I appreciate your patience, and I'm glad to have the chance to be here with you. I wonder, Adeline, if I might have your permission to expand the subject matter of my remarks here this afternoon. I'm here really for two reasons. One, because of the long and warm friendship toward the lady that you're going to honor this evening, one of your honorees this evening, who was instrumental in guiding my wife, Marvella, who's the best thing that's ever happened to me, along the pathways of social studies. And she was practiced teaching down at Bloomington, and I got to know Adeline very well then, and of course know of her interest in this group, and she and others have been so helpful in trying to put together this annual government leadership conference in which we try to make an opportunity available for our students who are interested in government, those who excel in this area, give them an opportunity to come face to face with open confrontation with real live public officials. And if indeed that program has been successful, it has been because of Adeline and several of the others here, and some who are not here, who have helped to chart the course. And I am not naive enough to ignore some of the pitfalls that one must avoid. Hopefully we've avoided most of them. Perhaps we have not avoided all of them, but if it's caused anybody any embarrassment, I'm sorry. But we're here because of Adeline, and I'm also here because of the deep appreciation that I have for what your council has done and is doing, and what you as individuals are doing to try to make this great experiment of government meaningful to the students of the state. I thought I might address myself to the immediate subject at hand, but I'd like to put it in a broader context, if I may. Because I think our efforts to amend the Constitution and to try to provide meaningful electoral reform is only one of a number of items of unfinished business. When taken individually, perhaps are not as critical as some of us who are personally involved with each individual item might think. But when all of them are put end to end, in my judgment, they tend to create additional concern. They, seems to me, or the lack of our ability to deal with them go directly to some of the problems which we see, which are so difficult to understand today. We're living in difficult times. I hope those of us who are toughing it out don't feel we're the first generation of Americans that have gone through difficult times. We're not. There are some unique aspects about some of the problems today. But interestingly enough, if you look at some of the traditional age-old problems of man, as far as hunger and disease, lack of housing, insufficient education, it seems to me we today have at our fingertip the capacity, the technological capability to solve most of these problems. The question is, do we have the determination to shorten that challenge a bit? I think today we have the can if we have the will. And I don't know the answer to that question. But I think those of you who are devoting your lives and have to the study of the social sciences, to try to bring the experience of government into the classroom, into the minds of those who are ultimately going to be full and participating partners, have a sober responsibility that's greater than that's ever been experienced by those who've taught social studies and government before. I've been working in the area of electoral reform for a number of years. I'm concerned about electoral reform because, in my judgment, it's a real imperfection in the system. And there are a number of people today who, let us face it, are asking some rather penetrating questions about the system itself. If there's one question that I receive repeatedly in the opportunities I have to visit with tens of thousands of young people all over this country on the various college campuses and university campuses, it's, Senator Bayh, do you feel this system will respond? Can a system that was constructed 200 years ago to meet the needs of a primitive society in a horse and buggy age, can it meet the problems of a people 200 million strong, technological society, space age era in which we live? Well, my quick answer to that is usually, well, our system will work, in my judgment, if we'll work in the system. But that's oversimplified. Indeed it is. Because it seems to me if we are going to be able to make the system remain a vigorous and responsive system, we have to search for ways to make a great system even more perfect and even more able to respond than it has in the past. The means in which we elect our president is just one example of a disparity between what we say and what we do. And I sense an increasing concern in the minds of many, many people, young people particularly, when they look at some of the distinctions between realism and rhetoric. And indeed, it is hard to find an example that is more dramatic than the way we elect our president. We are the envy of most nations as far as our ability, we as a people, to choose our national leader, the most powerful leader really in the world. But when we look at the imperfections of that system, it doesn't quite match up to the way we describe it generally and the way many of us feel it actually is. In 1968, of course, we had a real confrontation with tragedy as far as our electoral college system is concerned. Some of us may have forgotten. This is not James Michener writing some bestseller as far as a novel is concerned, but these are the facts, if you please. There had been a change of less than 42,000 votes in the right three states in 1968. There would have been no president elected on Election Day. It was that close. Add to this the fact that we now know conclusively that Governor George Wallace, third-party candidate, had signed affidavits from most all of the 46 electors that he had pledged to him. They signed these affidavits, pledged to do his bidding after the election. This is not meant in any way to be derogatory toward Governor Wallace, because the Constitution permits him to do this. But I suggest to you that if there had been that change of less than 42,000 votes, and if neither Mr. Nixon or Mr. Humphrey had had a majority of the Electoral College vote on Election Day, quite the contrary to what normally is assumed would have happened, namely that it would have gone to the House of Representatives on a one-state, one-vote basis, that indeed it would have been decided by Governor Wallace going first to the Nixon camp and then the Humphrey camp, and saying, in essence, gentlemen, here I have 46 electors, they're pledged to do what I ask them to do. What am I bid to make you President of the United States? This is hardly the way to run the world's greatest democracy, to have the ultimate in power pawned in some back room or decided in some back room, smoke-filled room. But I think this is probably what would have happened. Not only is it wrong to decide who our president is this way, I suggest to you that in this day and age, it would have been impossible for any president chosen in that manner to govern effectively. Now, there may be some people here who are concerned about the effectiveness of our present president. I don't care to get involved in that. Everyone can make that determination for themselves. But I do suggest to you that the problems would have been much more severe. The matter of confidence would have been much more critical if indeed the president had been chosen in that manner and not by a direct vote of the people, even through the ultimate electoral college system. We've been working at this, I say we, I don't know whether he's still here or not. The chief counsel of our subcommittee, Larry Conrad, was back there someplace. Larry, are you? Yes. He's from Muncie, for some of you who may recognize him. We've been working on this, and some of us, I point this out because as you who have labored in the vineyards of political science know that the headlines go to the public figure involved, whether it's a Bayh amendment or somebody else's amendment that passes or fails, but behind the scenes there are the staff people that really do the work, and Larry Conrad has been the one who's been doing most of the work on this electoral reform. But we got to looking at this system some 4 or 5 years ago, and it just does not stand a close test that I think a truly democratic system should stand in this day and age. First of all, as you know, we don't vote directly for our president. We vote for these electors who are completely free to disregard, in most cases, the choice of the constituency that chooses them. Secondly, all of our votes do not count the same. It all depends on which argument you pursue. On one hand, you can argue the mathematical argument that shows that in Alaska, one electoral vote represents 75,000 people, whereas in California, our most populous state, one electoral vote represents almost 400,000 people. Hardly equity in this day and age when we try to give everyone an equal piece of the action in our governmental system. But you can argue the other side, which goes to show that under the unit rule, quite the contrary to the belief of some that the small states have an advantage under the present system, Most of the political structures are developed and built around our major metropolitan areas. The campaigns are conducted to try to win narrow popular vote margins in those states that then will provide an entire unit rule electoral bloc. So the campaign is directed at the New Yorks, where you win by 10,000, you don't win by 10,000 popular votes on the national scale, you pick up 43 electoral votes. And so it is with California with 40, and Illinois and Michigan and Pennsylvania, and right on down the list. Those who feel that the small states, and this is one of the arguments that is used by some that say the small states really will never ratify this. Well, this is not accurate. Let me share an experience I had last July. I was in Alaska with Senator Gravel, and after a meeting I was approached by the Democratic floor leader of the Senate, and he said, Senator Bayh, I just want to tell you very frankly, if that Bayh amendment ever gets up here in Alaska, I'm going to vote against it. I said, oh, why? He said, well, because we in Alaska would lose all our influence. I said, well, no, I don't want to offend you, but how much influence do you have? And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, when was the last time there was a presidential candidate that came up here to Alaska seeking all of this influence that you have to bear in the election of the president? He thought a minute, and he said, well, 1960, Richard Nixon came up, and I said, well, that's fine, but if you read what Teddy White said in The Making of the President, he says the reason Richard Nixon lost the election is that he went to Alaska instead of campaigning in suburban Cook County. You can look at the elections, and there are some elections, if you get an even standoff between the major metropolitan states, then that mathematical advantage of the small states come into play. But a candidate who can get a majority of those large electoral vote states, the unit rule has the advantage. Anybody knows who gets into this game of presidential politics that you can grab the brass ring if you can carry the 11 largest states and the smallest, if you please. Those 12 states by the slightest popular vote margin, even if you're soundly defeated in the remaining 38 states in the District of Columbia. So it seems to me it's rather ridiculous to argue that one group should have an advantage or another group should have an advantage. I don't see why anybody should have an advantage. Each of us, whether we live in Rhode Island or Texas, Indiana, Alaska, California, wherever we might live, each one of us ought to have the same opportunity to elect a president. It ought to be one person, one vote, and it seems to me there's no excuse for any other system. Now, we looked further and we found that perhaps the greatest danger was the fact that the present system does not guarantee that the man who wins is the man that gets the most votes. 3 times, as some of you recall, we have elected a president who did not get as many votes as the man he was running against. Of greater significance to us, we found that in this century alone, a change of less than 1% of the popular vote. Change of less than 1% of the popular vote would have sent to the White House a man who is not the popular vote winner. Now here again, it goes back to auctioning off, bartering off the presidency in some smoke-filled room. I don't see how any man, regardless of his political persuasion, could be an effective president if he is not the choice of the people he's supposed to govern. Now looking at these 3 major shortcomings, we came to a rather obvious conclusion. After studying all of the various well-intentioned plans, there's only one plan that deals specifically with these 3 major shortcomings, and that's the direct election of the president. Only by direct election to the president are we personally involved, do we personally vote directly for our national leader. And if there's anything we need to do today, is to find ways to open up the system and give everybody a feeling of belonging and participating. Only direct election guarantees that everybody has one vote, and only one vote, no more or no less, for president. And only direct election guarantees, most importantly of all, that the man who wins is the man who has the most votes. That's why I've been strongly advocating the direct election of the president for a number of years now. One of the leading Indiana newspapers has not been too kind relative to my concern on electoral reform. In fact, they haven't been too kind about much of anything at all here lately. But that's like President Truman said, if you can't stand the heat, you get out of the kitchen, I guess, and I like it in the kitchen. But we've been accused of espousing some revolutionary scheme. Direct popular vote revolutionary? Well, now, let's face it. Everybody participating, everybody's vote counting the same, the winner being the man that gets the most votes. That is so revolutionary that is the same scheme we use to elect every official in the country, save the president or the vice president. This is the traditional way of doing things. We have just sort of limped along in this horse and buggy system, waiting for it to blow up in our face at a time when it's too late to do anything about it. How much better it is to deal dispassionately before we're confronted with a national emergency caused by an election tragedy. And that's why we've gone to work and we've managed to get the strong support of the American Bar Association, the Chamber of Commerce, the AFL-CIO, the UAW, the National League of Women Voters. That's why I'm sure, because of the equity of it, that 81% of the people have consistently over the last year suggested when polled by Gallup or Harris that they feel they ought to have a right to vote directly for their president. It's equitable, it's safe, and I think, frankly, we have the best chance of passing that, too, if I might be a bit pragmatic. The House of Representatives passed this measure we've been interested in for so long last September by a 339-70 vote. We finally managed to get it out of our Judiciary Committee only after some, what some might call devious parliamentary maneuvering in which we had to fight fire with fire. But it will be before the Senate, in my judgment, probably about a month from now. I think we're going to have a major confrontation there. We may even have a filibuster. Hopefully we'll be able to succeed. I don't know. I'm normally an optimist, as most of you know, but when it comes to getting two-thirds in the United States Senate, that dims your optimism just a little bit. But I think we're dealing with a problem, with an opportunity here that I think success or failure is going to a very great degree, depend on our ability to get the people feeling that they have a direct interest involved. I've had my faith in the system restored as well as dampened a bit here in the last few months, but I'm still convinced that to the degree we can get people interested in working and actively expressing themselves through the system, we can make it respond. To the extent that people are willing to sit on the sidelines and let somebody else do the job, watch out, we have trouble. And so much for the battle in the Senate. The next battle, of course, will be the state legislature. There we'll need 3/4. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to go early next year to the legislatures, and by then, if we are successful this year, we will have mounted a campaign in each state, and we would like very much to have your help if you feel this is a worthy cause in Indiana. Talking to your state legislators, the legislative candidates of both parties. Seems to me this is something that is no respecter of politics as far as the party affiliations are concerned. It's something that is important for the country, and hopefully we'll be wise enough to change while we still have a chance. Now let me shift gears just a bit, if I may, because I suggested earlier that the Electoral College imperfections is only one example where there seems to be a wide disparity between what we say, what we preach, and what we really practice. I may be stepping on a few toes here, and if that is the case, my apologies, but so be it. I'm deeply concerned about some of the things I hear and some of the things I see and some of the things that are happening today. And I think it's absolutely imperative for us to look at some of these questions to recognize. I think perhaps most of us do not recognize the legitimacy of the questions that are asked about some of the imperfections in our system. This whole business of the fact that there are some 11 million Americans today who pay taxes, who are called upon to make the supreme sacrifice in places like Vietnam, who are rearing families, who are participating in the economy, who stand trial with their elders and are subjected to similar penalties, and yet they don't have a voice in the policy, don't have a voice in choosing the officials that make these decisions. I think there's something patently inequitable about this. Not only is it inequitable, I personally believe from talking to so many young people that we're losing a tremendous amount of talent We have a number of young people that are tuned off, turned out. They've given up on the system. Most of them, I think, are willing to sit on the sidelines and just say, I don't want any part of it. A few are not willing to be so docile about it all and are bent on destroying the system and replacing it with one that's more responsive. I personally feel this alternative cannot be tolerated, but I think we ought to do something about the fact that these conditions do exist. I don't think it's just an accident that in our discussion relative to the lowering of the voting age that we found, interestingly enough, that the most militant and the most far out youth groups are not championing lowering the voting age. This was hard for me to understand until I finally realized that lowering the voting age was being used as a cause célèbre. Some of the leaders of these organizations, in talking to their contemporaries, look, there's no place for you in the system. So we're going to destroy this system and we're going to build a new utopia and we're going to give all of you a piece of the action. What's devastating to this particular argument, if the system purges itself of this inequity and gives everyone a full partnership. And I hope this is what we do. I hope this is what we do. There are those that are concerned about priorities in this day and age. And I think if we believe in government, as most of us believe in business and in our own personal lives, that we should invest our resources in those areas where we have the greatest amount of interest or the greatest problem, where the danger or the shortcoming is the greatest, then I think we have some real problems with priorities. We're talking about an ABM system that is questionable as far as its functionability. At this day and age, when there are 8 million kids go to bed hungry every night, I wonder if we really realize that the impact of some of our foreign policy ventures, where today the last figures I saw, we were spending $21,600 for each enemy soldier we killed in Vietnam, and we're only spending $44 federal dollars per boy or girl in our primary or secondary school. We talk about the importance of medical research, yet we have a budget sent to us that cuts medical research by 25%. We talk about the importance of really making education meaningful, and we suggest a budget that's going to close down most of the library programs for rural areas and the bookmobiles. It's going to cut back and going to remove all funds from federal dollars for counseling. Cut back appreciably in the scholarships that go to underprivileged youngsters. At the very time when we're hoping to open these doors of opportunity so we can give these young people hope for the future. These are some things I'm concerned about, and I think these are questions that you and I have to answer. I think it's well that we ask them. I don't want anybody to leave here with the idea that Birch Bayh is ungrateful. I'm proud to be where I am and proud to be a citizen of this great country. I think probably when we look at the imperfections of our system, we still have to say, as Winston Churchill said some time ago, and as you may recall the story that was told after World War II, there was some hard feeling developed between our two countries, and the Prime Minister was subjected to a considerable amount of criticism for certain relationships he had with the United States, and finally he took about all this he could, and he arose one evening on the floor of the House of Commons, and he looked to his critics and he said, I believe conclusively in the argument and the proposition presented by my critics, the loyal opposition on the backbench. Indeed, I do agree that the form of government in the United States of America is the worst form of government known to mankind, except any other form of government. John Kennedy put it a little bit differently, didn't he, in his inaugural address when he said, I would not exchange places with any other people or any other generation. I concur. I think most of us do. But I think it's time for us to recognize that we did not become the strongest, most wealthy, hopefully the most democratic system on the face of the earth by adopting a status quo attitude of accepting things as they are. We need to continually search for better ways of doing things. Industry and business has done this, and that's why we've had such a tremendous increase in our gross national product. Because although we're able to provide a better mousetrap, I'm not convinced we've yet been able to find a way to provide a better government, to shore up the imperfections. And this we must try. You in the area of social studies and the social sciences particularly must look for ways in which we can make this democratic system, this representative system of ours, more effective, more responsive, more participatory, so that it is in all its aspects what we hold it out to be. I'm convinced that, and here my optimism may show through, but I'm convinced that we can do this. I'm hopeful that we will. I'm concerned about some attitudes that are afield in the country today, and here again I may offend some here. I don't intend to, but I'm concerned about this erosion of faith in the system. I'm concerned about sort of an erosion of faith that exists between people. And I'm concerned about the fact that there now are some white people that think their problems are because of black people. Some black people think their problems are because of white people. And some old people think their problems are solely because of young people and vice versa. Some are told that because there are too many college graduates that this is the problem. This is a result of the problems that exist in the household of a high school dropout. We're even told now that some of us feel we should discriminate on a regional basis in this country. This is wrong. This is wrong. We have to search for ways to have better understanding. We never have all been alike in this country. We're certainly not today. And I don't think equality means likeness. Equality does not mean likeness. We have our differences, but just as different ingredients in steel makes for a stronger product when that is melded together, so differences in a population, if we think together, if we pull together, if we have compassion and love and understanding for one another, that makes for a stronger nation than if we were all cut from the same hue. I think it's important for us to recognize this. I'm concerned over the real lack of faith that many of our older people are having today, or experiencing today, as far as the youth of this country are concerned. I want to share an experience very quickly that I had yesterday, in which over the past 3 or 4 days we have been inundated by large numbers of young people from all over the country that are just sort of going from office to office out of sort of a feeling of desperation, as not knowing where to turn, feeling that no one will listen to them, and I think this is extremely dangerous. We don't need to agree with people in this system of ours always, but it seems to me we always must be willing to listen to divergence of opinion. So, with this in mind, I arranged yesterday to reserve the auditorium of the new Senate office building. This holds about 500 or 600 people, I suppose, at the most. And we passed this invitation out to any other senator who was experiencing this same type of concern expressed by young people, and asked any of them that wanted to come to join us at 1 o'clock yesterday. There were about 8 members of the Senate that finally appeared, both parties. And when I walked in the room, there must have been 1,000 or 1,100 people crammed in there. They were sitting, kneeling, standing, a mass of humanity. And we talked about the critical problem, the one critical problem of today, relative to what's happened and is happening in Cambodia and Southeast Asia. There's a matter of great concern to these young people. And I don't want to get involved in discussing this, but I want to suggest to some of you who may be on the verge, if you haven't already lost faith in the judgment of these young people, that in the short remarks that I made, the loudest, most spontaneous, prolonged applause came when I said, I am concerned, as you are, but I want to implore you not to be radicalized. I want to implore you to work in the system, to use your time and your talent to make this system respond to the problems which confront us today and not resort to violent solutions. And the place went up in an uproar, and the applause continued. And yet these are the young people who are described by some of our friends in the news media as bomb throwers. Most young people today don't want any part of that. They're concerned about the problems that exist in America today. They want action just as most of us should. They may not all agree with us. Not all young people agree on the solutions, just as all older people do not agree. But I think the important thing is for us not to lose faith. Not to lose faith in the ability, the talent, and the dedication of most young Americans today. Because I think they have what it takes. And the worst thing that could happen would be for those of us in position of responsibility, and some of you who have the responsibility of molding and guiding and directing them, to not recognize the great potential that exists there, and the great tragedy that would happen if indeed we would close the door and refuse to listen and refuse to let them participate fully. I might make one passing comment in closing, if I may. I ran into a friend the other day that said, seeing a lot of you on television lately. Well, I changed the subject quickly, almost fearful of what the conclusions were going to be. I think it's fair to say that as your senator, I have been involved in one or two matters of some controversy over the past 6 months. It's not been the kind of controversy which I really relish, very frankly. But I want to suggest to those of you who are in this business of shaping and molding and providing leadership for those who hopefully will provide leadership for us all, that I think you and I and all of us have the responsibility to look at these problems which exist today in the light of today's problems, today's need, and not be timid and accept everything we're told at face value. Let's study, let's find out the facts, and let's not be content unless we feel the answers are right, unless we have the best solution. I would much rather be for something than against something. But if something's wrong, don't we all have an obligation to say so? Are we going to let certain conditions exist which we do not like by default? I hope not. I don't think this next generation is. I think they're determined that they're going to try to shape things and they're going to try to deal with these problems in a very effective way, and I hope we will too. For those of you who may totally avoid controversy, and I, having been reared in the family of two wonderful school teachers, realize that the classroom is not a good place for controversy. But I want to suggest to you, I wonder if we shouldn't take a lesson from the words of Pastor Niemöller, uttered some 25 years ago when this great German clergyman was describing what happened before World War II as the Nazis took over Germany as the war began. He describes it rather eloquently like this: they came after the Jews, and I was not a Jew, so I did not object. They came after the communists, and I was not a communist, so I did not object. They came after the Catholics, and I was not a Catholic, so I did not object. They came after the trade unionists, and I was not a trade unionist, so I did not object. And then they came after me. And there was no one left to object. I hope that we'll have the courage of our convictions. I hope we'll be willing to object, speak out. I hope that dissent and free speech never dies. I hope we will resort to lawful, peaceful means, not to violence, as we object and desire to change things. And I hope that we will not overlook the blessings which are ours, which we sometimes take for granted. But I think it's absolutely imperative that each of us be determined to be discontented with anything less from any of us in governmental positions, that an all-out dedication, an all-out effort to dealing with the unfinished business which still confronts our country. I think we have a responsibility to see that this system is today, that this country is today, and will be for future generations. What Abraham Lincoln described as the one last best hope for freedom-loving men everywhere. It's a rather significant responsibility. It's ours, yours and mine, and I hope we don't shirk it.